Welcome to Unpacking Armenian Studies, but for a new era. When we began recording Unpacking Armenian Studies podcasts 4 years ago, it's hard to believe, but yes, 4 years ago, the purpose was to understand what scholars are studying and why. With the 2020 war over Karabakh, with Armenians on one side and Azerbaijan and Turkey on the other, the nature of the conversation changed, and we recorded two extensive series, one called Armenia and Azerbaijan at War, the other called After War, Before Peace, which attempted to explore the many still unresolved issues of the conflict, issues that must be addressed wisely, justly, with the long view in mind, if there is going to be at least the beginning of a hope for sustainable peace. Those were two series that we did in 2020 and early 2021. Today, we're back with a limited series we're calling Ukraine, Armenia, and War. And the purpose is to understand this new war, the war that is, at this moment at least, in the second week of March in 2022, at least at this moment, it's a war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that began with Russia's invasion of a sovereign country. But we're going to try to understand this war from a very specific perspective, from the perspective of Armenia and Armenians, and all of the Caucasus, really, where political and economic prospects are so deeply entwined with the various parties in and around this war. On the one hand, the two parties involved in 2020 were rather insignificant in size, economy, and on the international stage. On the other hand, these two countries, Russia and Ukraine, are the exact opposite. And still so much that is happening now in 2022 is reminiscent of what happened in 2020. So much was even possibly triggered by the 2020 war, as some commentators have said, and still so much that is to come and that will impact all countries, large and small. So let's get going and speak to today's guest. Harutyunyan is editor-in-chief of CivilNet, a bilingual, more and more trilingual news and analysis platform based in Yerevan, independent, fair, with a broad reach when it comes to geography and content. That is why we frequently reach out to Harutyunyan, the editor. Welcome again.
Hi, Salpi. Thank you for hosting me.
Of course. I just hope one day we can talk about something other than war.
I hope.
This series has several intentions, both to explore the similarities and differences in the two conflicts that are really not that distant in either time or space, and to understand how this Ukraine-Russia war is impacting Armenia and Armenians, and really the entire Caucasus. First, let's start with what Armenians know about this war. And then we'll talk about the context for Armenia, Armenians, Ukraine, and Russia. Of course, the Russian piece is better known. And then finally, what is happening already now today in and around Armenia that is a direct impact of the war. So we'll start with Armenians and their access to information about the war today. Given what we know about Russian news sources being controlled, censored, limited, how is the Armenian population receiving its news?
Armenian population mostly receives its information about Ukraine via Russian channels, either replicated by local Armenian media outlets or directly from Russian TV channels that are broadcast in Armenian, that are aired all over the country. And there are two types of perception by average ordinary Armenians in Armenia. I'm not speaking about political conspirators and manipulators. I'm speaking about average Armenian
We'll have
citizens.
to talk about them too, okay.
The average Armenian perception is that this conflict is a very unjust war by one country which invaded another, a sovereign independent country, etc. and average Armenians' perception is that this conflict is going to have repercussions and impact on the larger periphery of the Russian Federation, the space of former Soviet Union. And on the emotional side, lots of people, lots of Armenians juxtapose the two conflicts, the war that we had in 2020 in Karabakh with the current war in Ukraine. And most of them pinpoint that Armenia was left alone with Turkish-Azerbaijani aggression, while Ukraine is getting so much international support and empathy, etc., etc.
But how does that translate to an understanding of the difference between media coverage and empathy and actual support? At the end of the day, Ukraine is still fighting its war.
Yes, and Ukraine is still fighting a war, and not many people go that deep into the details to really compare not only to point the similarities, but also to compare, to point the differences of the context between the Karabakh war and the war in Ukraine. And this is the general understanding in the population among average Armenians.
When you said it's mostly the Russian sources via Armenian sources, how about Ukrainian sources?
The disinformation comes not only from the Russian sources, but also from the Ukrainian sources. For example, we at CivilNet look at two sources, also the third-party sources, and trying to understand the real news and sorting out from fake and disinformation. And I would say that, for example, the Ukrainian news, they are very much tended to inflate the number of losses on the other side, etc. And the Russian sources also on their part using this disinformation war and not calling it a war, but a special operation, etc., etc. And there is this Russian expression when they talk about Ukraine, they don't say in Ukraine, they say on Ukraine, because in Russian, na Ukraine и в Ukraine. Na Ukraine means that Ukraine was окраина, periphery. It was a periphery of the Russian Federation. В Ukraine means Ukraine is an independent country, and you can, even with this wording, with this play, you can see the differences of coverage. We, for example, at CivilNet use in Ukraine expression, not on the Ukraine, while most of the Russian media, with the exceptions of some liberal media outlets that are already banned, like, for example, Rain TV, Medusa, etc. Most of them use on Ukraine, not in Ukraine. So in Armenia, you can see this, that most of the media outlets that simply replicating the Russian propaganda, and
these media outlets are equally legitimate and respected, impactful. That's the word I'm looking for. In other words, this replication of Russian information reaches an audience. It works.
It reaches the audiences. And most of the people do not have the media literacy to compare, to check the sources, to check the facts, etc. Most of the people just read the titles on their smartphone, to just scroll down on Facebook and see what's there without going deep into the details, etc. So
yet on the other hand, you said that the average Armenian is sympathetic to Ukraine's sovereignty being violated by Russia. So on the one hand, they're getting information from Russia, but on the other hand, they get the general context.
Yes, but for average Armenian, it's also a very sensitive and very existential issue, because Russia's failure in Ukraine, everyone understands it very well, that Russia's failure would mean certain impact, certain repercussions on Armenia's economy, and especially security, and particularly in Nagorno-Karabakh. And we already can see that Azerbaijan is deliberately escalating the situation on the borderline, firing the Armenian positions, Armenian villages, etc. So
it's happening.
It's happening. They cut down the gas supply, so these sort of things are happening. And Russia's Russia's military failure in Ukraine would mean that Turkey and Azerbaijan would try to end their unfinished war that was not finished with conquest of all the Nagorno-Karabakh territory.
Well, how does Karabakh get its information about what is happening in Ukraine?
They're mostly they're more pro-Russian than people here in Yerevan, and they have the reason to be such, because Nagorno-Karabakh security now is totally dependent on the Russian peacekeeping force, and we saw that President Harutyunyan was among the first to congratulate the recognition of the Donbass and Donetsk and Donbass and Lugansk republics, and they're highly sympathetic about Russia's actions, and of course they have their certain sensitivities, which can be bit different from average Yerevan inhabitants' perceptions.
So we need to talk a little more about what is happening in Karabakh, and both impact and perceived impact. But let's go back for a moment to what happens if Russia loses. But what happens if Russia wins?
So it's
what's the perception in Armenia?
The choice of any outcome would mean either you get bad or you get worse. So if Russia wins, it means that Russian economy is going to be to continue being under these heavy sanctions by the West. Russia's economy is going to be crippled by these sanctions, when this would have certain, again, repercussions on Armenia, because Armenia is heavily dependent economically, in security terms, and politically is very much dependent on Russia. And these new geopolitical divisions would, at certain point,
exacerbate.
Yes, exacerbate the situation and make the current Armenian government or the future Armenian government to make choice. Either you are with Russia or you are with the rest of the world.
Which has been Armenia's challenge since independence.
Armenia was navigating very well until probably 2014, when it had to join the customs union. I don't know. So
the Eurasian Customs Union, right?
Yes, it's going to have repercussions on Armenia. On the other hand, there is a silver lining of the situation, although it's too early to claim such things. But there is the silver lining that there are so many Russians arriving in Armenia, and they are the liberal part of Russians. They are the experienced, qualified people, most of them, as far as I understand, who were not geographically dependent, physically dependent on one place. What they need is just just a word.
Lodging and a place to live.
Just a place to live and a good internet connection. So as far as I understand, their work is more connected to the West. That's why they are much freer. It's not about shuttle merchants. It's not about blue collar workers. It's about a high quality labor force that is arriving in Armenia. And it's a really big opportunity for Armenia to absorb these people and integrate into its economy. But
The flip side of that, though, is that with their funds frozen, they are, for the moment at least, poor and unable to actually meet their expenses. At least that's been the story in Istanbul and other places.
Yes.
That they arrive with credit cards that suddenly don't work.
Yes, there are so many angles to this,
Yes.
to this situation. We'll see.
So the presence of Russians, but also Ukrainians?
I can't differ between them, so they look similar, but they say that also some Ukrainians also have arrived. Now it's much more difficult for Ukrainians to come to Armenia. They mostly go to Poland and the neighboring countries, etc. But most of the arriving citizens are coming from Russia.
Back to Karabakh for the moment. The source of information is more Russian. The reliance on Russia, both psychologically and for security purposes, is clear. The Russian peacekeepers are still on the ground. Has that relationship changed at all during these 2 weeks? The relationship between the Russian peacekeepers and the Armenians on the ground, the Russian peacekeepers and their response to Azerbaijani encroachments?
I don't think so, but there might be certain change or certain disruption of neutrality of Russians over time if this continues this way, because any encroachment on the Armenian villages is an encroachment on the prestige of the Russian peacekeeping force, etc. So it remains to be seen. For the moment, Azerbaijanis are just palpating the situation, not really trying to break the ceasefire regime, not really trying to invade into Karabakh, but they're trying to sort of see what is the reaction to cause some sort of panic among Armenian population.
And how are they doing this? What exactly are they doing?
There are, for example, they are announcing in Armenian that you should leave your places of living, you should leave your villages in Armenian, and then Russian peacekeepers are coming and warning them. They go back, then later
the Russian peacekeepers are coming in and warning the Azerbaijanis.
Warning the Azerbaijanis to go back to and then they continue the same practice in other villages. So it's going to repeat again and again until the war in Ukraine is not over, until the situation is not stabilized in Ukraine. So there is this direct or indirect connection between the security in Karabakh and security in, I don't know, elsewhere.
And this is Garen Harutyunyan saying this, or does the population of Karabakh?
There is this perception among wider population, because I was 3 times in Karabakh in this year and in 2 months, and this is the general feeling and understanding of the local population in Karabakh.
So you mentioned that there's the bullhorns and the threats and the encouragement to leave, but that's just talk.
It's
What
not talk. They're announcing. It's not. It's an intimidation. It's not talk.
But there's no firing?
There is firing. They're trying to intimidate the villagers to leave the villages. They're trying to intimidate and create unbearable conditions in Karabakh in order for the local population to leave, etc. So
You said you have a nephew on the front line there.
Yes, I have a nephew on the front line. I talked to him today, and their positions were fired today. He was sort of frightened today, and
They were fired upon. Their positions were fired upon.
Yes, their positions were fired upon. So it's really very difficult personally too, because my nephew is coming from army, and he's the last. He's among the last waves of Armenian conscripts to serve in Nagorno-Karabakh. No more Armenians from Armenia would go to Karabakh to serve for serving in the local army. So, however,
this is an outcome of negotiations.
War. But although my son is going to serve in Karabakh, he was born in Stepanakert. He had the opportunity to either serve in Armenia or in Karabakh. He chose to serve in Karabakh, so he would go to army in July to Karabakh.
It only gets more complicated. At the end of the day, Azerbaijan and Armenia, or Armenia and Karabakh, Artsakh, are small players on the international stage. Russia and Ukraine are not small players. And the fact that that conflict has reached this stage where, as you said earlier, all of the world is watching, and yet at the end of the day, it's up to the local Ukrainian soldier and citizen to do what they can to defend themselves. How does this sit psychologically with an Armenian population that continues to seek Western support and understanding, and Russian support and understanding?
I think this is a huge blow to the Western prestige, because Ukraine was totally left alone with all its NATO and EU aspirations, was totally left alone against Russia, even though there is this much support, international support and empathy, but no foreign soldier, no foreign army is coming to really support to curb the Russian invasion. So Ukraine, the example of Ukraine is a very salient one in terms of other former Soviet Union countries to see how to deal with this rapidly changing geopolitical situation. If you have the imminent threat, imminent danger, you should very well calculate the options. You don't have the opportunity to miscalculate. You don't have the opportunity to fail. Ukraine failed because of its miscalculation, failed, and it could have saved the country from invasion if it really declared about its neutral status earlier than Russia could invade. So it's my personal opinion, because there are many commentators that say that Russia's aspirations and Russia's goal go beyond just Ukraine's NATO aspirations. So in case of Armenia, we should be very, very careful and very prudent to not to make the same mistakes that Ukraine did.
very, very quickly in the 2-3 minutes we have left, I want to understand that better. Yes, the NATO EU aspirations and their role in sparking this conflict is part of the conversation. The other is Ukraine's, although very weak economic status, but politically seemingly much more democratic and reform-minded, at least in the last several years, and how that has impacted Russia's fears, concerns, aggressions. What is the thinking there?
Yeah. There were some commentators in Armenia pointing out that, for example, macroeconomic indicators between Armenia and Russia, between Armenia and Ukraine, and for example, per capita GDP in Armenia, in a landlocked country with ongoing conflict and with Azerbaijan and Turkey, per capita GDP in Armenia, according to the World Bank data, is $4,300 US. Per capita GDP in Ukraine is $3,700. Purchasing power parity per capita PPP in Armenia is bigger than in Ukraine. It's more than 13,000. It's almost the same, but again, in Armenia, it's more. In Armenia, we had the last census in 2011, and we are going to have another census soon. We found out that the last census in Ukraine was conducted in 2001. So it's really talking. It's about the misadministration and failure about the failure of a country.
At the same time, though, given the ability of at least the last election and even the one before that to elect what has been billed as the people's choice, is that also a threat for Russia as it is perceived in Armenia? Does Armenia think that democracy is as worrisome for Russia as NATO?
I don't think that that's a general feeling in Armenia, because no matter who comes to power in Armenia, they don't have a choice to come out from the Russian sphere of influence, because Armenia will continue to be economically and politically and in security terms dependent on Russia. So it's not that easy for any Armenian government, even if they come through fair elections like this one. Because if you remember the rhetoric during the revolution and before the revolution, this government and the
in Armenia
itself, yes, they were more pro-Western, anti-Russian, etc. But they're now becoming more obedient, more loyal to Moscow, and
yes,
that's the reality. So no choice for Armenia. But if we are smart enough, we can navigate and become sort of Hong Kong, not Hong Kong, but a place that
even Hong Kong isn't Hong Kong anymore. All right.
That's why I'm cautious about
yes,
bringing that example. But we can be a sort of democratic island oasis in this huge Eurasian economic space. I don't know if that's possible, but at least we need to try it. And Russia itself would probably need such a place. I don't know.
Thank you, Garen. Thank you very much, Garen Harutyunyan, editor-in-chief of CivilNet, for helping us begin to try to understand the broad ramifications of war, Ukraine, Armenia, and war. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. Listen also to the rest of the podcasts in this limited series, where we will try to explore issues that impact all of the neighbors in the Soviet space, in the post-Soviet space, in and around the world, including Europe and the United States. Thank you for following us here at the Institute of Armenian Studies. I'm Salpi Ghazarian. This is Unpacking Armenian Studies.
You've been listening to Unpacking Armenian Studies, a podcast series on the Institute of Armenian Studies channel. This episode has been produced by Sadin Habesyan. Music by Josue Gonzalez. For more from the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, go to the Institute's YouTube channel to hear dozens of talks by scholars from all over the world. You can reach the Institute at Armenian.usc.edu and follow the Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This podcast has been recorded at the University of Southern California, Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences.